Erev Tov Yoknam. Good morning in Kansas City. Welcome. My name's Wayne Firestone, and greetings to all the friends of Israel around the United States, around Israel, and around the world. We're excited to be with you. It's that time of summer when you start thinking about that list of books that you had hoped to get through by the end of the summer. Well, if you haven't got through everything, we've got a great recommendation for you today with our episode with our good friend here, Gol Kalev, and his new book, which is Judaism 3.0. You don't have to know about computers. You don't have to know about Judaism. You just need to get a copy of this book, and we'll give you all the details on doing that later on in the program. But tell us a little bit, have a little bit of a community building moment here about the books that you are reading, or you're in the middle of, or you want to recommend for others. In addition to Gol's book, please put in the chat something that you've been able to get to read this summer, or something that you're starting to flip the pages for, or you've already gone to Amazon, you got it sitting there in your Kindle, and it's just waiting for you, to make it through the rest of the pages. Lessons in Chemistry is a book that I've also heard recommended. Please put into the chat something that you're reading and where you're calling in from today. We have a global community, the kind of talks and speakers that we have. The Ark of the Covenant by Walter Russell Mead. Interesting. So everyone, please share what you're reading. Keep it going throughout. And if you were on the fence about whether you're going to read this book, let me offer you a couple of testimonials right up front from some folks who have already read it. Our first testimonial comes from the Minister of Interior of Israel, Ayelet Shaked, the former Justice Minister. She is indeed a member of the Prime Minister's Inner Security Cabinet and one of the earlier readers of Gol Kalev's book. So take a look and a listen at some of the things that the minister had to say about Judaism 3.0.
Hello everybody, and greeting from Israel. Gal Books is revolutionary. It shows how Zionism is becoming the centerpiece of Judaism. How both Jews and non-Jews relate to Judaism throughout Zionism, whether it is in a positive or in negative. Gal also shows how this helps counter the escalating political attacks on the Jewish state. How once there is a recognition that we are in Judaism 3.0, anti-Zionism becomes anti-Judaism. I am very proud to be a Zionist, so much that I named my party that I formed the Zionist Spirit. As Gal says in his book, we in Israel might have a lot of disagreements, but we are united in a common ideology of Zionism. So thank you, Gal, for this extraordinary contribution, and I hope to see you all soon in Israel.
Well, in addition to Ayelet, we also have a wonderful greeting from many of our from our audience will be very familiar with Ambassador Michael Oren, a historian who's written his own books about the Israel-U.S. relationship, indeed a former member of Knesset, an ambassador to the United States. I know he has been in conversation with Gol about this book for some time, and I'm excited to share some of his words and greetings as part of this intro to our discussion today.
Judaism 3.0 by Gol Kalev is an extraordinary cutting-edge book. It's a book that has to be read by anybody who cares about Israel, who cares about the Jewish people, our past, our present, and above all, our future. It is a book that may excite people, it may anger people. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it, you can adore it, you can despise it, but one thing you cannot do is ignore it. Judaism 3.0 is an essential part of our debate, a debate about what it means to be Jewish and what it will mean to be part of the Jewish state, both in Israel and abroad as supporters of the Jewish state. I've read this book several times, I've engaged with it, and I fully endorse it. I think that it's an essential part of our discussion, what it means to be Jewish today. Judaism 3.0 by Gol Kalev. Please read it.
Gol, it's great for a kid who grew up in Tel Aviv and went on to be an investment banker on Wall Street, to be back in Jerusalem, writing a book about your thoughts, your travels. What does it mean to you to have the kind of illustrious readers? And tell us a little about the audience that you're learning is interested in the book. Obviously, it's not just members of the Israeli government, because as a global traveler, as a global thinker, this book is really for people all around the world.
Absolutely. First, thank you very much for having me, and hello to everybody on this call, and to you, Wayne, and all the people at the AIFL. Yeah, this book is absolutely meant for everybody, not for just cabinet members or intellectuals. It is it's a book that's meant to be a retail book that already has readers and followers that are very diverse. I know from the emails I get and from also the people that attend the events, physical and virtually, we have people who are progressives and we have people who are Trump supporters. We have Democrats and Republicans, the entire political gamut also here in Israel. We have Jews, Muslims, Palestinians, Christians, religious, secular, atheist, because the book is really non-political, and the general message that I'm saying is that Judaism is going through a historic transformation, and that Zionism is becoming its anchor. There's a shift of global consciousness of what is Judaism. Now, I'm not saying that that's what it should happen. I'm saying this is already the way it is, and I'm showing that by doing a survey of both Jewish arenas and analyzing global trends, showing how the world relates to the Jews. So people from various views can relate to that. And it's interesting that it's not scientific, but in general, Wayne, there's two sets of comments. Some people are saying, well, this is sort of obvious. Judaism is, Zionism is Judaism, or Judaism, Israel is becoming the main part of Judaism. And some people, as Minister Shaket said it's revolutionary. And this is a really a shift in conventional thinking. So I think the book meets people in different ways. And yeah, it absolutely is meant for everybody. And some people, because the book goes into, in its different chapters, different analysis of Israel, analysis of trends in American Jewry, analysis of trends in America as a whole, analysis of global trends in Europe. Some people suggested that this should be a multi-volume book, that I should have like 8 or 9 volumes. But most people don't take 8 volumes to the beach. Maybe you, when you're in Puerto Rico and you have a lot of beach time, but I wanted to make it a book that's easily readable. And I think that people, not everybody's going to read the full book. I mean, some people are more interested in, the sections about trends in Israel, the sections about trends here or there, or about the totality of the argument, or about what it means, because the first 2/3 of the book or so is sort of trying to prove the thesis. But the bottom part of the book is going into a discussion of, okay, well, let's say you accept that we're in Judaism 3.0, that Zionism is now the anchor of Judaism. What does it mean in terms of addressing the existential threats to Judaism? And what does it mean in terms of unleashing the extraordinary opportunities that Judaism has and its ability to make a profound contribution to humanity?
All right. Well, look, I suspect that, just as Ambassador Oren pointed out, there are points in this book that people will agree with. There are points they will disagree with. I was struck by your definition up front, or your instruction up front, that this is not a call to action book. Yep. This is the diagnosis of what you see happening. So can you tell us a little about the process of creating the book? I know that, for a period of almost a decade, you were the chair of the AIFL think tank. You listened to people, you convened people on rooftops, in your home, around the world. Some of these voices, and at what point did you decide you needed to sort of formulate your central thesis and put it in this book for people to react to?
Yeah, so as you said, this book has been in the works for more than a decade. And I guess there's two vectors. One is that about 15 years or so, I developed a hobby, and that is to study Theodor Herzl. Herzl is, you know him as the visionary of the Jewish state. He's the one who dreamt and philosophized about the return of the Jews back into their ancestral homeland, but he also created a mechanism and the infrastructure that enabled it. And until 15 years or so, I, just like everybody else, knew a lot about him, but I didn't knew the depth of his ideas. And once I started studying it, reading his original diaries, his letters, what other people wrote about him in contemporary, the letters that he went back and forth, visiting the places he wrote, trying to sort of like get into his headspace, I realized that he wasn't just creating some mechanism for the reestablishment of the Jewish state. He was planting the seeds for the transformation of Judaism. Herzl himself looks at Moses, and he analyzes Moses, and he says, well, the Exodus in the Bible is not just about migration from Egypt to Canaan. It is what Herzl calls education through migration. The 40 years that the migration is almost an excuse. It's a transformation of then the nascent Jewish nation into something else. And that is exactly what Herzl was said to do. And that's something that's often missed about Herzl. So Herzl is certainly a theme in the book, and I connect his original vision to what we're seeing today in reality. But most of the other vector and the main way in which I got into this book is really through life, through living for all those years in New York, for traveling, for being in a lot of different social circles, be it with investment bankers or in the art world, or talking to people in the UN in New York, or being with politicians, or traveling to Europe, or visiting the heartland, or all of that, and certainly being here in Israel in multiple societies. I'm from Tel Aviv. I live now in Jerusalem. I spent time in the north with Arabs, with Jews, with Haredis, ultra-Orthodox, seculars, atheists. So it's really, when I was a banker, I would go into meetings, and instead of talking about the company I would work in, mergers and acquisitions capabilities, people just wanted to talk to me about Israel and where we're in Judaism. So it's really a byproduct of all this conversation. And as you pointed out, about 11 years ago, I put together many of those people. Most of them are not Jewish or not related to or not engaged Jews. And we created a think tank that we've housed in the America-Israel Friendship League for the last decade or so. And in this think tank, just as you said, when we had your robust conversation, I wrote a number of position papers that people reacted to. We got a lot of fresh perspectives. It wasn't an academic think tank. It wasn't going in front of professors or something like that. It was going in front of real people. And I started writing articles, mostly for the Jerusalem Post, which I still do, and for other publications about this topic. So I was able over the last decade to fine-tune the messages, both through the think tank and through reactions from readers about those long-form articles, both readers like the ones like Michael Owen and Ayelet Shaked, and European ambassadors and European politicians that were commenting from the inside, but also regular people that were just sending their comments. So this is a book that's really been in the work for over a decade, and it's really a byproduct of what I like to say is a byproduct of life in Judaism 3.0.
Well, so let's make sure we get everybody on the same page. Why don't Gol, you made the very important point that when transformations are happening, you don't always get an email announcement telling you, no, transformation is happening. Yet you've gone out there and done some analysis and forecasting about what you see happening. Tell us a little bit about 1.0 and 2.0 and how we know we're in 3.0.
Right. So Judaism originally was basically the Judaism we know from the biblical stories, but also from historian and archaeological accounts. Jews were in Judea. Their anchor was the temple. You might have gone or not gone to the temple, but that was sort of your point of Jewish orientation. The ritual of the sacrifices that was performed in the temple, and the centrality of Jerusalem in the Jewish, in the Judean ethos. All of that was gone when two European invaders came in, and the Romans eventually exiled the Jews. They destroyed the temple, they destroyed Jerusalem, so no more ritual of the sacrifices, and no more Jews in Judea. The Jews were deported mostly to Europe, and that is where Judaism 2.0 evolved. Judaism had to transform because its organizing principle, the temple, the physical presence in Judea and Jerusalem was no longer relevant, the war was no longer there. So Judaism 2.0 was really the life in exile of the last 2,000 years, where the synagogues replaced the temple and the insular life replaced the Jewish ghetto, if you will, replaced the physical life in Judea. And that was good when Judaism 2.0 had two glues, basically an internal organizing principle of rabbinic Judaism, of the religious aspect of Judaism, what we know today. Today, you don't say, most people are Jewish, you don't say, well, I'm a Jewish who's a rabbinic Jew. It's obvious that you're not a Jew that's a biblical Jew that's still going to the temple or wishing to go to the temple or wishing to do sacrifices. There's been a shift. There's been a canonization of the oral Torah, the Jewish law, and as we discussed, the worship in the synagogues, the structural prayers. And they also had the external glue of insularity. The Jews simply could not get out. Now both of those are gone. Religiosity has been receding dramatically over the last century, or really until 200 years. It's fair to say that almost all the Jews were religious. Their life centered around Shabbat and things along those things. Now it's much less. It's different statistics, 10, 20%. And Jews are free to leave. So, but just as the religious anchor was diminishing, the national anchor of the Jewish nation religion has been dramatically augmented with the establishment of the Jewish state. But just the fact that Israel was established in 1948 doesn't mean that Judaism was going through a transformation, and Herzl understood that. He understood that transformation takes a long time, that the shift in human consciousness takes a long time. And we had a lot of hurdles in the first 75 years or so of Israel's existence, including its Zionism's over-association with secularism, which wasn't Herzl's original view, but that's how it evolved. And objections by the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox sector. I'm showing in the book how all of those hurdles are removed, and now by the 2020s, the vision of Herzl's is coming to fruition. Judaism is transforming now in the 2020s. So yes, there's no email or announcement, but I'm showing in the book how now we are at a new stage of Judaism where both Jews and non-Jews relate to Judaism through the conduit of the national aspect of Judaism, through Zionism, through Israel, and that is done both in the positive and certainly in the negative. So if you will, maybe we'll talk about it, but the opposition to Judaism that existed throughout time is now funneled almost exclusively through Israel, which is just one indication that we have transformed.
So I want to give people a second to digest that thesis. You are positing that at this moment, whether you like Israel, you love Israel, you are indifferent, you don't want to come visit, you're not following the news, that it's impossible to relate to your own Judaism without having some reference point, if not a central reference point, to the modern state of Israel. Is that correct?
Not exactly. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I mean, on the individual level, you can relate to anything on anything. There are different individuals that relate to Judaism in different ways, but I'm saying as a whole, when you ask what is, just like today, we said that we're rabbinic Jews, but there are individual Jews who are still Jewish and they don't believe in the synagogues and they don't celebrate Hanukkah. These are the Karaites. So, so you can say I'm still in Judaism 1.0. So I'm not talking about the individual level. I'm talking as a full kind of what is Judaism in people's perception, and how do Jews as a whole relate to Judaism. And I'm showing that the primary conduit is through Israel. So for example, in the negative, even if like the example you mentioned of somebody who doesn't visit, doesn't care, I have a lot of friends in New York who are like that. They're not practicing religion either. They don't go to synagogue. They don't think about the Holocaust anymore, which they used to when people, when there was a lot of Holocaust survivors, when, if you're a 30-year-old or 20-year-old Jew, your grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. Today, the 20-year-old Jew, his grandmother is an American grandmother, just like the Italian Jew is an American grandmother. She's not Sicilian, and he's not, they're not like the old Jewish grandmother. But Israel pushes you into your Judaism. So some of my friends, when we had recently last week a conflict in Gaza, or last year, they wrote a Facebook post, as a Jew, I'm embarrassed about Israel. Or as a Jew, so there's never as a Jew, I believe that this week Torah portion is this and that, or as a Jew, Israel brings you to as a Jew, and certainly if you have a Jewish last name, Goldenberg or something, and you walk into a college campus and somebody's saying your people are murdering the Palestinians, you are forced to react. You are again forced into your Judaism. You might not even be Jewish. You might just have a Jewish last name, or you might, relate to Judaism, as you said, went through other aspects of Judaism, Tikkun Olam, or other ways, but the outside forces you back in, and that is exactly a deja vu all over again to what Herzl experienced during his time when the anti-Semitism movement became rising. So back then also, you had a lot of Jews who said, I have nothing to do with Judaism. And some Jews said, I even converted. And Herzl said, the only thing that will happen if a lot of people converted is that they'll stop calling us dirty Jews and will start calling us dirty converts. So he showed how it is completely irrelevant to try to live Judaism, or to, you are defined by your Judaism, and you're defined by the most relevant aspect of Judaism. And I'm showing in the book how people, whether they like it or not, relate to their Judaism primarily through Zionism and Israel. That's not the only connection, but that is the predominant connection, and the one that is perceived increasingly by the outside world.
So one of the beauties of this audience, and indeed the work that America-Israel Friendship League has been doing for over 50 years, is bringing together conversations and perspectives about the dynamics of modern day Israel now in real time with the help of Zoom. And so we're getting a lot of reactions already to people both in Israel and in the United States. So let's talk, one of the questions, the early questions that we have from Karen is about what trends you're seeing as it relates to traditional religion and some of the markers for Judaism, marriage versus intermarriage, conversions, in and out, etc. What are you seeing? Let's start first in terms of the diaspora, the outside of Israel, and then I want to talk a little bit about the trends you're seeing within Israel.
Okay, so first I'll just say briefly that Judaism has always been a nation religion. Until 100 or so years ago, it was obvious to everybody that if you were a Jew living in Spain, you were Jewish. You weren't marrying a Spanish, you weren't Spanish, or a lot of my friends are saying, a lot of my Jewish friends in New York call themselves Polish. But they were never Polish when they were in Poland. They were Jews, but now sort of like in retroactively, you said you're Polish. So Jews were always a Jewish nation religion. And what happened over the last century was an attempt to break up this package deal. So an attempt of denationalization in the United States with American Jewry, where there was an attempt to reduce Judaism just to the religion, to the quote unquote Jewish church. And there was an attempt in Israel, not envisioned by Herzl, but by the people that followed him, to sort of somewhat strip the religious aspect of the Jewish nation religion and reduce it to the Jewish nation. Both of those attempts have failed. In the United States, maybe it could have worked if the Jews stayed religious, but at the same time that the Jews denationalized, meaning they no longer were, they got out of the ghetto, the virtual ghetto in the Lower East Side, and having Jewish friends and being a Jewish profession and eating Jewish food. As they got out of it, there was also a secularization. So the remaining glues of Judaism weren't strong enough to hold it. The Holocaust provided a temporary glue because Jews united through the memory of the Holocaust. And as I'm saying in the book, if you look at, let's say, Jewish-themed movies, the vast majority are about the Holocaust. If you look at Jewish-themed museum, if you do an analysis of the budgets that goes to museums, Jewish-related museums, it's mostly Holocaust. So that is changing now because the generations are passing, and whether we like it or not, the memory of the Holocaust is not as vivid when there's less live people, over the next few decades to testify about it. So the religious aspect of Judaism in an environment where only about 10% of American Jews are religiously engaged is not enough to hold it. The analysis that I'm doing is about the core of the American Jewry. There are 10, 15, 20% that are engaged Jews. Certainly people who are Orthodox, and for them religion is a key aspect of their Judaism and of their life. But there again, they're, depending on which survey you read, I mean, they're less than 10%. And there's an additional 5, 10% that are engaged with Judaism in another way. They may be non-Orthodox, but religiously go to synagogue, to the Reform synagogue every Shabbat, or they're involved in Jewish organizations like you, Wayne. You're an engaged Jew, but 80% or more of Jews are not engaged through religion. But the fact that you can engage through Israel, through things that you guys are doing in the America-Israel Friendship League, through those webinars and otherwise, that in turn, that brings you back into your Judaism, and that in turn enables you to reconnect with your religious aspect. So what I'm showing in the book, or at least arguing, is that, and on the one hand, it sounds that I'm saying something that's not as pro-religious, but I'm saying that there's a shift in the anchor of Judaism, there's a shift in the anchor of the Jewish nation religion from its religious aspect to its national aspect. But I'm also saying that that shift makes Judaism more relevant, and because of that, there is a re-engagement with the religious aspect of Judaism. So we're seeing this a little bit in America, but we are certainly seeing this in Israel, where just like there was, the party that won elections in the 1930s, not Ayelet Shaked's party, not Michael Owen's parties. The Ben-Gurion-led party was a revolutionary party, and they won elections in pre-Israel into the Zionist institutions. And they sort of had a view that we were rebelling against the old Jew, and the old Jew was religious. So there was sort of like this idealization of secularism in Israel in the early years into the 21st century. Now we're seeing in Israel two things. Now we're seeing a shift from the secular minority that are in Israel are self-defined as roughly 40-45% to the religious/traditional majority. But we're also seeing a religious rapprochement amongst the secular. So if in the 90s or 80s, it wasn't cool, to go to synagogue or to pretend that you're religious, the worst thing in Israel would have been that if you've been perceived as somebody who's chozer b'tshuva, who's becoming religious, it's like, was akin to like, oh, you're joining a cult or something, we're living. Now it's a fashion. Now it's, it's kind of increasing your social status if you're engaging in more and more religion. So, and that is done again through strengthening the Zionist identity, through strengthening the national identity of your Judaism. You connect to other points in Judaism, including the religious points.
One of the terms that you used or identified as a trend in Israel is something that I was unfamiliar with, datlaf. Tell us a little bit about what that means and how it relates to your understanding of the transformation that's happening within Israel.
Yeah, so that's very relating to what we said. As I mentioned, I write for the Jerusalem Post, and one of the first articles I wrote years ago was arguing that the mainstream of Israeli secularism is what I called sometimes religious, which is datlaf is the acronym I used for dati lefamim, sometimes religious. And so Israeli seculars, I'm not even talking about the traditionals. I'm not talking about the 60% or so, 55, 60% that self-identify themselves as religious or traditional. I'm talking about the secular minority. For them, very few of them are real atheists, and very few of them are anti-religious. The growing trend is that they consume religious experience a la carte. So I have friends that on Shabbat open a YouTube and watch a discussion of the weekly Torah portion, which is obviously a violation of religious law of Shabbat, but they do that. That's how they consume. Or somebody just told me they light the candles after sunset because it's the time her kids come home. So people engage with religiosity in their own way, and that is an enabler of this transformation. Because if Zionism is as it was in the 20th century, perceived to be anti-religious, then it cannot be the organizing principle of Judaism. Just like if Zionism is perceived to be socialists, it cannot be the organized principle of Judaism, where a lot of the Jews live in the United States and elsewhere that celebrates capitalism. So that shift in approach to religiosity within Israel is an enabler, and we had a whole discussion about that recently at the Begin Center, along with some people, with Moshe Koppel and Daniel Gordis and others who are thinkers about those things. So yeah, being the rise of the Datlaf is an enabler of the transformation to Judaism 3.0.
You know, I want to come back because we have so many different comments now related to generational issues of identity, Jewish identity in particular. In this context, Ruth has pointed out that in the Pew study, which you quote from and reference in the book, that the largest self-definition for many younger Jews is the just Jewish category. And so there is a positive reference to that, but that many of these, and our good friend Jill has pointed out, of these just Jews have removed themselves from this conversation that you are engaging in, I am engaging in, our audience is engaging in, but that we're seeing increasingly younger generations walking away from. So how are you relating to people who are defining themselves outside of Israel as Jewish, what they call just Jewish, not with a qualifier in terms of a religious movement, etc., but really not saying that they are doing that through the prism or lens of Israel?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying, I'll be a little bit blunt and provocative. I don't care what they say. I care what they do. I care about their life. So the surveys, the Pew surveys that I've spoke to the people who did this at length, and somebody did a analysis around it for the book. It's very different when somebody asks you, and are you this or are you that? In reality, there's really the way the framework I like to use in the book is you're either an engaged Jew, an affiliated Jew, like the one we spoke about earlier, that through religion or through activity, like you, Wayne, or you are an under-affiliated or disaffiliated Jew that that it's hard to draw the line, but that Judaism is lower on your hierarchy of identities. You're many things. You're a Harvard alumni. You're a lawyer. You're a singer. Whatever. You're a dancer. You're gay. You're a woman. You have a lot of identities. And Judaism is maybe 100 years ago, Judaism was on the top of the identities. If you ask somebody in New York on the Lower East Side, he says, "What are you?" He says, "I'm Jewish." Or you ask an Irish person, he says, "I'm Irish." But now, Judaism is there, but it's low on the hierarchy of identities. So when you have a survey about Judaism and you ask them, "What are you?" then it's not as indicative, to be honest, about the reality of what Judaism is. So I'm not saying you should connect to Israel, and I'm not saying, but I'm showing that whether it's in the positive or in the negative, this is de facto where a lot of American Jews meet their Judaism in various aspects of engagement, and the various trajectory of engagement. So I have friends who, let's say, go to watch on Netflix Fauda or Hidden One or some sort of a show. They less so watch Fiddler on the Roof or all Jewish shows. Whether it's mostly a passive connection, it is done through Israel, and certainly through the negative. And let's face it, the American Jewry is not as a whole, not as or it's a more vocal in its criticism of Israel than the rest of America. And that is also, to me, an indication that Judaism is transformed, because for many of those critics, criticism of Israel has become their primary connection to Judaism. And we had recently a synagogue in Chicago, I believe, that got together and passed a resolution that they're anti-Zionists. So to use the frameworks of research of Pew, they'll say, "Oh no, this book doesn't mean," that disproves the book because we said we're anti-Zionism. But as I'm showing in the book, this type of behavior proves the thesis or supports the thesis, because what got them into synagogue? I mean, they don't come to synagogue to pray. They don't come to synagogue for lectures. They don't come to synagogue for, gefilte fish preparation workshops. Most American Jews simply don't go to synagogue, but Israel brought them back to synagogue. Now, in this case, it was in a negative. So they had deliberations and debates and agreements and whatever they had that, and they came out that we are anti-Zionists, fine. But you're there. Zionism drew you back into your Judaism. And once you're in, in the synagogue, maybe you'll see on the billboard, an ad for a lecture that will interest you. Maybe we'll start coming more for Shabbat services. So whether we like it or not, whether it's active or passive, I'm showing how Israel and Zionism draws this affiliate or under-affiliated Jew back into his Judaism.
Gol, before we go deeper into some of the questions and the implications of your thesis, I want to make sure we carve out a little bit of time for the historian that connects both of us and your love for Theodor Herzl. Now, we've bonded over this topic as on lesser known points of Herzl, the fact that he was a playwright early in his life, and that and you shared some stories in the book that I enjoyed reading about some of his inspirations. But very interestingly, as a framework for the book, you quote him as saying, Zionism is a return to Judaism, even before it's a return to the land of the Jews, which is, I think, something that most people would find surprising to hear. What did Herzl see? And we the last time we were together on one of these webinars, we were having a virtual celebration for his birthday. So I know you've given a great deal of thought to his shadow, his huge shadow on the subsequent Jewish history. What do you think he understood that that others at the time didn't get, and that has sort of been borne out as we look at the transformation?
So I'll say that, if I may, before that, you should be very proud of these webinars, because since this webinar, there has been a Herzl revival. There were thousands of people on the webinar. At the same year, we've done a special Herzl magazine at the Jerusalem Post with readings for the then Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and other Herzl thinkers. And Herzl has been, somebody who hasn't been researched. And until 15 years ago, I probably have the same view as you, that I would be surprised about Herzl saying that, what does it mean that Zionism is a vehicle for the return to Judaism? There's been a lot of Herzl revival. There is actually, next week, I'm going to Basel, in Switzerland, where the first Zionist Congress was there. The president of Israel, Bougie Herzog, is hosting, along with the chair of the World Zionist Organization, Yaakov Haguel, a gathering of Zionists back in the place that it all started. The World Zionist Organization also created this thing called the Herzl Forum to promote ideas, how we can reinstill Herzl's vision around. And there's a book that I'm participating about Herzl by Karl Mannheim that's coming out. There's 3 or 4 other books that are in the works. So there's a Herzl revival. So, and I think the AIFL webinar has something to do with it, because it's, once we had it, we sent it very broadly into opinion leaders. So thank you for doing that. But Herzl, I think, to answer your question, he saw a lot of things that people didn't see. But relevant to that, he understood the state of Judaism. He understood Judaism 2.0. And Judaism was primarily not an organic type of religion. It was reactionary to Jewish persecutions. That was Herzl's, I'd say, one of his sort of like very, very points of departure. Because what is the Jew? Like the Jew that is a moneylender, or the Jew that is timid because he's in the ghetto, the Jew that is moving from one place to another, is the wandering Jew. All of that is not because that's what being Jewish is. That is reaction to the abuse that Europe has given the Jews since the beginning of the European Jewish engagement, since Greek times into Romans, and then into 2,000 years of Jews living and being persecuted in Europe. That was Herzl's understanding. And he also understood that is chronic, that is not going away. and that there's nothing that the Jew can do to change that. In the Dreyfus, the Dreyfus trial gets a lot of attention in Herzl's narrative, but it tends to be exaggerated. But in the years even after Herzl, France was divided into two camps: the people that were for Dreyfus and people that were against Dreyfus. Dreyfus was a Jewish officer in France that had nothing to do with. He was a disaffiliated Jew. He was no longer Jewish. He was certainly not a Zionist, but he was accused of treason because he was a Jew. There was basically a plot that was proven wrong. But still, half of France believed that he was guilty. And it's not that they believed that he was guilty. It didn't really matter. It mattered he was Jewish. And we're certainly seeing this today again, vis-a-vis, accusations of Jews being committing crimes against humanity, just call it Israel, and things along those lines. So Herzl recognized that Judaism is not, the Jew that we know today in the 19th century is not the Jew, is not the organic Jew. And therefore, there needs to be a transformation of Judaism in order to bring back Judaism to its organic self, and that is Zionism. So the Zionism is the return to Judaism before it is the return to the promised land, just like Moses' Judaism is the return to faith in God before its immigration to Canaan. And that is something that's very important. And I've written, 70 articles or so about Herzl, including about this aspect. The other thing that Herzl understood that very few people understood at that time is what I just mentioned, the chronic nature of European opposition to Judaism. And I'm saying European because not just Herzl was in Europe, and it's not just that the Europeans are the one who took the Jews out of Judea into Europe, but the majority of Jews most of this time lived in Europe, 80-90%, depending on which time. And that is where the opposition to Judaism evolved. And at Herzl's time, there was a view that there is no more such thing as opposition to Judaism. There is no more Jew hatred. It was a golden age for Jews in Western Europe, where the Jewish, cosmopolitan elite, if you will, the establishment was like Herzl. There was a view that since Europe became secular, then there is no more Jew hatred. Because in the Middle Ages, the opposition to Judaism was funneled through Christian religious vehicles. And one of Herzl's predecessors, Moshe Hess, who wrote actually around the year that Herzl was born, roughly 30 years before Herzl envisioned Zionism, he was convinced that as soon as the power of Rome will be reduced, meaning the power of the Vatican and the power of the Catholic Church will be reduced, then Jews will be liberated. We will rebuild Judea. Herzl understood that Christianity was just an excuse, or basically Christianity was hijacked by Jew haters to express their opposition to Judaism to the vehicle that's most relevant to Europeans at that time, which was religion. Now that Europeans are secular, then the vehicle changes. And indeed, at Herzl's time, a new form of opposition to Judaism came around that nobody expected. And that form was given a name, and it was called Anti-Semitism. And that is an opposition to Judaism that is not religious-based. Okay, fine, you do not use the blood of Christian children to make matzah, and you don't do all those kind of horrible religious rituals, but you're rich, or but you're cunning, or but you all that stuff that we know. We see you everywhere. You're beggars, you're peddlers, you're horrible people. So it was a national hatred. It was no longer a religious hatred. It was a national hatred to Judaism, and really within the last 50 years since the anti-Semitism movement developed, it was served as the ideology for the attempted genocide of European Jewry, all Jewry. So Herzl saw that. He saw how the opposition to Judaism, and you can't change it. So you can't just put an ad in the newspaper and says, remember what you were taught for 1800 years, all those horrible things about the Jews, forget about it. You can do that through a revolution. And I'm not departing from Herzl and saying what I'm writing in the book. You can do that. The American Revolution did that, because the American Revolution was a revolution against European dogmas. It was against European philosophies. And one of them was this opposition to Judaism. So you can do that in a revolutionary kind of way, but not as a business as usual kind of way that is so deeply ingrained in the European psychic. And therefore, Herzl realized you need a radical solution. You cannot the solution is not hasbara, is not what we call today, not Israeli PR, or what was then known as committees against anti-Semitism. He mocked them. He said it was futile because you cannot change dogmatic thinking. You can't convince the person who's anti-Dreyfus in France that Dreyfus wasn't a traitor, because it was obvious he wasn't a traitor. By the time, like a decade after his trial, it was clear that he wasn't. And still, many people, by the way, till today in France, are convinced that he was, because he was a Jew. And same thing, we see the same thing here in Israel. And that's what I'm doing in the book. I'm showing a comparison, which is startling, between the early days of anti-Semitism and Herzl's approach to the early days of Israel bashing, which is today's vehicle of expressing opposition to Judaism. And it's the same thing. There's nothing that we can do about it in terms of, oh, if we only withdraw out of Gaza, then we'll have the moral high ground. Remember that, Wayne? Everybody said, oh, no worries. And then if you get attacked, attack them back and everybody will be behind you. That's what happened. We got attacked. We defended ourselves, and the UN certified that our actions of defense was labeled as a crime against humanity. Jews defending themselves is officially a crime against humanity. Or what we've seen in Gaza a year ago, and even now, the idea that we are genociding, or the eviction of a few families, as sad as it is, amounts to ethnic cleansing and things that on and on and on. It goes on and on and on. And there is no, as I think all of us that are involved in this thing know, that it's very difficult to convince somebody through PR, and that's why, which I don't want to advance the conversation ahead of time, but that is why, that is the message, that is the consequences of this book. So I said this book is descriptive. It's not, there's no call to action other than to read it and agree or disagree with the thesis. But if you agree that Judaism is transforming and Zionism is now essentially the essence of Judaism, or the main part, the anchor of Judaism, then you can no longer hide behind this fake facade that says, I love the Jews and I hate the Zionists. Or some of the Jews are my best friend, but I'm saving Jews. It would be the same as saying 1,000 years ago, I love the Jews, the ones that used to serve in the temple, but I hate the Jews that go to synagogue and celebrate Hanukkah and wear kippah. Once there's a global recognition, a broad global recognition that Judaism is transformed and Zionism is its anchor, then that mitigates the existential threat of Israel bashing. And that is, as I discuss in the book, an existential threat to Judaism and to individual Jews, including those who bash Israel.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how you were very clear in saying that European anti-Semitism is no longer an existential threat to Judaism, but you're explicit about Israel bashing and other existential threats, which reminded me of, you don't fight your next battle based on your last battle.
Exactly.
So tell us, just so everyone is clear on that, what do you see as the three existential threats that we need to address today?
Yeah, the essential threat I discuss in the book is Israel bashing is the most dangerous threat. The others is post-Zionism, which is akin to post-Judaism. And the third is the evaporation of American Jewry that affects only half of the Jews. And actually, if it materializes, then it's then of course, Judaism is Zionism, because that's where the Jews are going to be. But I'm showing how recognizing the transformation. So basically, if you agree with the first 2/3 of the book, I'm showing in the last 2/3 of the book what are the consequences. And when it comes to Israel bashing, like anti-Semitism is obviously a threat to individual Jews, but it's not a threat to the existence of Judaism, meaning there's no plan to round up the Jews and murder them by government. But Israel bashing is, because there is such plans and of different levels and intensities under the banner of Israel bashing. So, for example, in the International Criminal Court, there is an ongoing multi-year, well-funded investigation against Israel, basically. I mean, it's against potential war crimes by soldiers, by settlers. It's basically by everybody. We're all soldiers. Everybody in Israel. Every product we buy in Israel, part of it is made in some sort of settlement someplace. So we're all war criminals. So it's a real threat. It's not a threat that people think will materialize tomorrow, but it could also have a demoralization component if they start arresting generals, settlers, residents of Jerusalem when they come and visit Europe. So there is an institutional component of the Israel bashing mechanism. We saw that horrendous report by Amnesty accusing Israel of crimes against humanity and apartheid and all that kind of stuff. So that is the threat, Israel bashing. not, anti-Semitism is also a threat, but, the other thing that Herzl taught me, at least, is he had an issue with this policy people like to say about zero tolerance to anti-Semitism. He thought that was a very dangerous policy at his time. And we have to understand that there's those energies out there, and he engaged with anti-Semitism. Same with Israel bashing. I mean, I'm not saying it should be zero tolerance to Israel bashers. And I have friends who are Israel bashers. Through my articles, about the stuff we just talked about, engage with European ambassadors and politicians and diplomats who have totally different views than I do. And even people who work in the so-called conflict industry. People think there's only Jews and Palestinians in Jerusalem, but there's also this group of Westerns and Europeans who live in their own enclaves and have really fun parties working in the UN, various agencies, NGOs, and a lot of my journalist friends. And Israel bashing is sort of their dogmas, and they promote this sort of like neo-religion of occupationalism, which is, in my view, a form of white colonialism. It's basically hijacking the Palestinian plight and reducing anything and everything that has to do with Palestinians to one thing and one thing only, which is the occupation, and creating a whole ritualistic stuff around it, including tourism. So I'm writing a lot about it. If people want to read more, they're welcome to. I write in the Jerusalem Post and in other places, but you can visit my site, europeandjerusalem.com. But the point of all of this is that this is a real threat, Israel bashing. And just like Herzl understood, the threat of anti-Semitism requires a radical solution, which is the establishment of the Jewish state. This threat requires a radical solution. And in my view, is the recognition that Judaism has transformed and Zionism is its anchor, because we have an asset. Wait, and I'll stop here. And the asset is that, unlike in Herzl's time, it's not popular to say, I hate the Jews. It's popular to say, maybe I hate the Zionists. But once people understand that when you say the Jews are an apartheid nation, or Jews are committing crimes against humanity, that will deter the attackers from attacking.
So there is also this very delicate issue, which is being raised in the chat at the moment, at how to ensure in any democracy that criticism, disagreement, minority views, pushback, particularly aimed at government policies, etc., is embraced. And so I know this is a topic that you've given a lot of thought to, and want to make sure you have an opportunity to address how is it that at the same time you can have these existential threats of Israel bashing that are taking place with people who have talked about it happening in academia and universities. You talked about it happening in the context of the human rights movement, et cetera, and other places that have traditionally been very hostile to Israel. But it also is a challenge for people who have legitimate concerns. So how can you ensure those people that Judaism 3.0 will not be monolithic?
Well, I mean, it's already happening, because some of the early readers of the book are people who are highly criticized of Israel. So yes, they're not Israel bashers, just like, and they're not people in the past that says, oh, Jews use the blood of children to make matzahs. But there might be people, to use the analogy, that says Jews are too rich, or Jews are too active in the stock market, or Jews have antisocial behavior. So, or less, or, and Herzl too had criticism about the Jews. He wrote one of his first foray into Zionism was a play called The New Ghetto. And that was, if it wasn't written by Herzl, somebody might say, oh, maybe it's an anti-Semitic play. It's a criticism of Judaism, but that was within within, let's say, the line of acceptability. Same with today. I think criticism is essential, but you need to have a framework to provide that criticism. And I think Judaism 3.0 is exactly this framework, because let's relax and say, okay, it's done. Israel is here. If you accept the thesis in the book, as many readers have, or accept a form of it, that Zionism is the anchor of Judaism, then let's have a debate within Zionism about what Zionism is and what it should be and what Israel's policy should be. I'm not touching that at all. There are other people, Zach Bordner in San Francisco Palo Alto has a whole organization about the future of Zionism. Other people have organizations about the future of Zionism. And certainly Minister Shaked that just spoke has her view about Zionism. She's in Israeli politics, and Ambassador Michael Oren have written so much. He's named as one of the 5 most influential Jews, by forward, there's a lot of people that are debating about where should we take Zionism and Israel and policies. I'm not doing that in the book. I'm saying let's agree that this is where we are, that Zionism is the anchor of Judaism. And then, the debate could be anchored in love and in cooperation, and there'll be disagreement and there'll be passionate, as Minister Shaked said, we have passionate disagreements in Israel, and sometimes that really gets into high tones, but we're united in this bedrock ideology of Zionism. So the ideology of Zionism that unite us, over 99% of Israeli Jews vote for Zionist parties. There's a separate, obviously, issues vis-a-vis non-Jews. And Zionism is our uniting anchor. So once we accept that, then the debates become more normal, and even if they're loud, so we can have them more safely, including disagreement. And that's why I'm very proud that a lot of the people that's supporting the book and come to the events are people who have a lot of issues with Israel's policies.
So, Gol, there were a lot of things in the book that surprised me and animated my thinking on a number of these topics. But the one thing that did not surprise me, but delighted me, was the reference point you had to where I think some of these animated conversations about the Jewish present, the Jewish future, and the Jewish past, for that matter, should take place. And that is the shuk. And I know that from our dear friend, Ruby Shamir, our colleague,
Yes.
who often organizes meetings for you with visitors who come to Israel. And if you have any choice in the matter, you have those discussions in the shuk. So just say
Absolutely.
a couple of sentences about where you live, why the shuk is both why the shuk represents a new venue, in a sense, for the kind of conversations about the Jewish future that need to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the shuk metaphorically, I think, is the whole, we're all in Israel in one big shuk. Thank goodness, post-corona, we have back a lot of delegations in Israel, including all those wonderful delegations of opinion leaders that America-Israel Friendship is bringing in under the leadership of Ruby Shamir, our Israel CEO. And my message has always been to all those delegations, as opposed to meet this and having 10 meetings a day, let them have hours in the shuk. Shuk Machne Yehuda is the vegetable markets in Jerusalem that has transformed over the last few years from just about food into having bars and cafe and a lot of interactions. And I live right there and have been having conversations with nuns, with rabbis, with Palestinians, with anarchists that are very random, very unplanned, and are very safe because I don't want to get into trouble, but we don't have a lot of trigger warnings of political correctness in the shuk or in Israel in general. And that is why I would recommend for everybody to come and to you guys, to the America-Israel Friendship and all the wonderful stuff that you and Jonathan Barsad and Eric Gertler and Cassia and Raquel and Giovanni and Ruby, you're all doing. But if I can have a recommendation to allow people more free time in the shuk so they can see Israel and Israelis with their own eyes. And it just gave me a wonderful idea, actually, Wayne, as we're transitioning the AIFL think tank and making it by the end of the year the Judaism 3.0 think tank, so we can really expand the conversation. The book is not just a book; it's a way to engage in this conversation, including people who disagree. So we're gonna reignite this think tank, but I think we should have it based in the shuk, and maybe we'll have the reinauguration or event of the Judaism 3.0 think tank in the shuk, and I hope when you'll come.
I will absolutely come. I'm not going to give away any more secrets for the book. We put the link from Amazon into the chat for those of you that are joining us on the Zoom call. If not, just Google it, Judaism 3.0, Gol Kalev. You can actually get a hard copy of the book. You can get a electronic copy of the book. Certainly this conversation needs to happen in the shuk. It needs to happen in places around the world. It needs to happen, hopefully, more as a result of these virtual conversations as well. I can assure you there will be wine that will be served if you have the conversation in the shuk. I'm not going to reveal any more than that, but I know
Israeli wine.
But I do know that it will be Israeli wine, and that is something that we hope everyone will avail themselves to. So for now, we will wish Gol a Nisiat Tova, safe travels to Basel, Switzerland, and a conference that recognizes that the historic work of Herzl is not over. It is not merely a history lesson. It is a work in progress in many respects, and we're grateful, Gol, for your sharing some insights about the book. For those of you that are with us week in and week out, and by the way, I know we covered a lot of ground, and I know, like in the show, people talk loud, people talk fast. We will send everybody who wants it a free copy of the video link if you want to go back and learn more about any of the topics from this discussion, or if not, just go read the book. That's your homework assignment for the rest of the summer. But until then, we have another episode coming for you as early as this Sunday. We're going on one of our virtual tours with Shachar. We hope you will come join us. This is part 2 of looking at the River Jordan and the ancient water tributaries. We'll be going to the ancient cities of Dan and Banyas. Please come and join us, unless you're there. If you're there, take pictures, send selfies, make your own YouTube videos. Dip your feet in the water, and until then, come back and join us here at AIFL. We love these kind of conversations, and we love the community that we can build together today. Have a safe week and weekend, everybody.